Okay, AP Psych class, welcome to video 2 of Unit 6 on learning. This theory of associative learning is called operant conditioning. So if we take a look here at the difference between operant and classical conditioning. In classical conditioning, we were talking about forming an association between two stimuli, and if you remember, it had to be predicated upon something that is automatic or unconditioned or unlearned. In operant conditioning, we're actually going to say that an organism, like a person or an animal, can associate their own actions with consequences. And so this may seem like common sense, but this theory is going to say that an action followed by a reinforcer is something that is going to increase the likelihood the behavior will happen again. And if the behavior is followed by a punisher, it will decrease the likelihood that the behavior will happen again. A good question that is posed by Myers in your textbook is, which form of associative learning is the best? Are we just, organisms learning associations between events that we have no control over? That's classical conditioning. Or are we learning associations between behavior and resulting events? And so operant conditioning kind of gives us a little more cognitive freedom in the learning process. Some of the basics there would just be punishment and reinforcement, but we'll more specifically define those later in the slideshow. Some people that you should know. Thorndike comes up with the law of effect. Again, I know this will seem like common sense to many of you, but behaviors followed by good consequences get repeated, and behaviors that are followed by bad consequences are less likely to occur. But remember, this was pretty important in the foundation of this theory of learning. B.F. Skinner is another behaviorist psychologist that is one of the founders of operant conditioning theory. He built on Thorndike's idea to implement behavioral control on animals. So Skinner was known for developing what's called an operant chamber or a Skinner box. Fun fact, he actually advocated putting his own kids in it. But what happened was that you could place an animal, a child if you will, or a pigeon or whatever he was working with, and give them a bar that they could press to receive a reward of food or water, and a device that would record their responses. And so I'll show you some videos in class. Skinner could train pigeons to press the bar at the for different colored circles or for certain words. And so it was all based on the reinforcement that they were receiving. Another important thing that Skinner helps develop is this concept of shaping, that reinforcers can guide our behavior toward closer and closer approximations of the desired behavior. And so like a great example of shaping would be training wheels on your bike when you were little, or when you learned to swim. I doubt that they threw the toddler you into the deep end of the pool, right? And so starting with baby steps and reinforcing those baby steps to get us closer to the desired behavior is just something we call shaping. A discriminative stimulus is going to be something that elicits a response after it's associated with reinforcement. And so the fact that animals and humans can discriminate between stimuli shows that we do have some cognitive freedom in the learning process with operant conditioning, more so than with classical conditioning. Okay. Some types of reinforcers. We can talk about reinforcers being either primary or secondary, and we can talk about them being positive and negative. A primary reinforcer, similar to the concept in classical conditioning. A primary reinforcer is something that is biologically predisposed, meaning things that we don't have to teach people to desire, things that you need for survival, like food, water, air, those sorts of things. A secondary reinforcer is going to be any reinforcer whose value had to be learned. And so, like money is a great example of a secondary reinforcer, in that give an infant a dollar bill, they're going to try to eat it. They don't understand its value until they are older and can learn its value. But reinforcers not only are primary or secondary, they are also positive or negative. And the easiest way to keep this straight is to think of positive and negative in terms of math, like giving and taking away. Can you think of them in terms of good and bad? You can, but that will really confuse you when we talk about punishment on the next slide. All right, and so a positive reinforcer is anything that increases the behavior that follows when it is given, and a negative reinforcer is anything that increases behavior it follows, the behavior that follows when it is removed. And we'll do lots of examples of both, all four of those in class, actually. How you apply a reinforcer is what's called a reinforcement schedule. Obviously, the first one is continuous reinforcement, and that would just be every time the behavior happened, the person or animal was reinforced. Continuous reinforcement may seem like a grand idea, and most psychologists will tell you to initially acquire learning. Continuous reinforcement is important, but it is not the way to ensure that the learning stays permanent. And so most psychologists will say that if you want a behavior to endure, you should implement some sort of partial, or it's often called intermittent reinforcement. Okay, and there are a couple of different kinds of partial schedules. We can talk about things being fixed or set, and we can talk about things being variable or random. With the words ratio and interval that follow those adjectives are just referring to whether or not we are reinforcing based on the behavior happening, that's a ratio, or whether or not we are reinforcing based on time, that's an interval. So a couple of examples. I receive a paycheck 2 times a month. That is a fixed interval. It is not based on my behavior. I could teach you, I could not teach you, I could come to work, I could call in sick. Regardless, I will get paid twice a month. Fixed interval. That's based on time, right? Seconds, minutes, months, days, weeks, years. A ratio would be based on behavior. Selling door to door would be ratio, in that I'm not going to make any money unless I physically do the behavior of knocking on people's doors and peddling whatever it is I'm selling. Selling door to door is going to be a variable ratio, in that I don't know how many doors I have to knock on before I make a sale. It is not a fixed ratio. All right, and so lots more examples of those, both in your textbook, and we'll do practice problems in class. Punishment is a word that is often misused in everyday vernacular. In the world of operant conditioning, a punishment is anything that stops a behavior. And we can talk about punishment in terms of positive punishment and negative punishment. I know that sounds strange, that there's such a thing as positive punishment, but I think of positive and negative in terms of math. A positive punishment is anything that stops a behavior when it's applied, and a negative punishment is anything that stops a behavior when it is taken away. And so that's why you should not think of positive and negative in terms of good and bad, in that a negative punishment usually involves taking away something good, right? You do something at home, your parent says, "That's it, no cell phone, I'm taking it from you." That would be a negative punishment. The cell phone is taken in an attempt to get you to stop doing whatever it was you were doing. So we'll practice with those again in class as well, just to give you an idea of what you can do with punishment versus reinforcement, because they are easily confused. All right, cognition and operant conditioning. What do you think? Most people will agree that operant conditioning, although still a behaviorist theory, does give you slightly more cognitive freedom than did classical conditioning. There are some cases that explain that we will get to later in class. But still, like classical conditioning, operant conditioning is based on biological predispositions. Like it or not, reinforcement has to begin with a primary reinforcer. And primary reinforcers are things that are unlearned or natural. So we still have that as a weakness in operant conditioning. And applications of operant conditioning, goodness, you're a child in a public school system. Your life is has a plethora of applications of operant conditioning, so come ready to discuss those. And so, again, operant versus classical, their similarities is that they're both associative learning. Classical, you are associating stimuli together, and in operant, you are associating a stimulus with its consequence or with its response. And so bring any questions that you have with you to class, and we'll do lots of video and practice examples when you get here. As always, thanks for listening.